Hi Tim J, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for coming back to my channel. But if you are new here, don't forget to subscribe, like and comment. Just stay tuned. Today we are going to be doing a side pattern with a closure using a dome cap with a sewing machine. So we are going to be as accurate as possible for you to get it. I hope you'd like this video. I hope you enjoy it. But if you also find it useful, just don't forget to show me some love. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share this video. Thank you. Without further ado, let's start the tutorial. So today we are going to be doing a side part pixie cut on a dome cap with a closure using a sewing machine. First of all, we would have to adjust the dome cap onto the canvas head. We make sure that it lies flat on the canvas head, and I'm using canvas head size 23. After it's placed firmly on the canvas head, we adjust it with pins. You can use T-pins or any other pin that you feel comfortable with. But you adjust it properly and make sure it lies flat before placing the closure onto the dome cap on the canvas head. So this is a 3-part closure that I'm going to be using. I've already bleached the knots, as you can see. So I'm going to place it sideways. Since it's a side pattern, I don't have to place this in the middle like we regularly do. But I'm going to place this on the side and pin it down to lie flat before I start sewing. So I place it at the position where I'm comfortable with, or I would want my pattern to be before I start sewing. So I make sure I pin it down. So as you can see in the video, I start by pinning the down side. That's my first step. And the second step is behind before I come onto the third part and then pin. It's firmly placed down, so I do my stitches onto the dome cap, making sure that I don't sew into the canvas head. I use blanket stitches all the time, and I make sure that when I'm done, I use the machine to stitch the closure onto the net, just to avoid loose ends, because it's easier when you sew the closure with the sewing machine onto the net before you even start stitching your first track. But either ways, you can finish sewing your wig before running stitches with the machine on the closure. I sew a bit on the left side and I sew a bit on the right side, and I seal it in the middle. That's what I usually do, just to avoid overlapping at the end when sewing a closure. So I usually stitch both sides and then seal it or finish up in the middle. And I'm still using blanket stitches through. Positioning the closure onto the dome cap or whichever net that you are using is very important, because that will determine where the line or the pattern is going to be. That depends on what kind of part you'd want. You can create an artificial part apart from the pattern that they've made on the closure. That solely depends on you. You can decide to have a curved line, which will definitely be created by you if you want, or you'd have to use the patterns created for you. So if you decide to use the patterns that have been created for you, then it means you'd have to position your closure very well before you start sewing. So you can mark the lines with your hands without measurements. That depends on you. For some of us, we can use our eyes to measure and get accurate measurements, but it's not for all. So if you feel you're not conversant with using the free hand to do it, then you might as well just use a tape measure and then mark 1/2 inch throughout. As you mark, you make sure they are even. But the fact that you are marking on the net maybe half an inch doesn't mean you are going to sew on the exact marks you've made. Because, for example, from the beginning, I might want to space it out a bit because I would like the back or the nape area to be flatter than the occipital area. So I may decide to use the lines as I've marked, but going towards the occipital area, I would want that part to be fuller because I would like that part to be raised. So I can sew in between the tracks. In between the tracks, you can decide to sew one track, or you can decide to double your track or triple the track in between the lines. So that entirely depends on you. But I usually use the marks as my guide. But along the line, since I know what I want, I choose to insert tracks in between the lines I have marked. So you don't necessarily have to follow the lines like line for line. No. You're just marking. I personally think that marking the lines is just for is a guide. But it doesn't mean that, because if you mean to mark every track or every line on the net, it's going to look clumsy and you wouldn't even know where to sew when you're using the sewing machine. So that's why I do it this way. While marking, ensure that you have straight lines, because you wouldn't want to have curved lines as you stitch. Because sometimes when the lines are curved towards a certain direction, it will alter the size of the net as you sew. So you must be mindful of that. If you don't mark the lines at the right places, you might finish the cap and you'll not be satisfied with the results. So the marking of the lines and its accuracy is very important. It's something you should look out for, especially when you are stitching on a dome cap or an adjustable net while using the sewing machine. Because mind you, each stitch alters the size of the net you are using. The more the stitches, the smaller the cap becomes. But if you are able to get the right technique while stitching with the sewing machine, you'll be fine. You wouldn't have to worry about it. So if you're able to get the guidelines right, if you're able to get the markings and the positioning of the hair right, you'll be fine. You wouldn't have to worry about it shrinking, the net shrinking, or the cap shrinking. It wouldn't be a problem. And when you take a closer look at this, you'd realize that since it's a side pattern, the right part of the cap or the net is bigger than the left side, because the closure has been tilted towards the left, which makes the left side, the space on the left side smaller than that of the space on the right side. So I'm going to mark more lines on the right side. So the bigger the space there, the more you'd need to fill. So since the right side is more than, the space there is more than the space on the left, I'm going to add more lines to it, which means I'm going to add more hair to the right side to be able to match up with the space on the left. To conclude, if you want the right side to be fuller, then it means you have to have more tracks on the right side. But you can't have so much hair on the left side where the closure is, because it's going to look very full. But once again, that also depends on you. If you'd want your left side to be fuller, that's fine. And if you want the right side to be fuller, you add more tracks to it. That's basically it. But if you don't want the right side to be full, you just go in with the regular fullness. And now, as you can see, I'm having more tracks at the occipital area because I need to fill that part. So coming from the right side, I make sure I end around the occipital area so that I get more tracks over there to make the back look fuller. And now at the frontal area, since I want the hair to also fall forward, or I want the hair to be more, I choose to mark it straight, or I can choose to curve it. So as you see that I've placed this track on it, I can choose to let the hair fall forward, or I can choose to let the hair fall sideways. It all depends on the style you want to achieve. But either way, none is wrong. You can use whichever one that you are comfortable with. As you can see, I've placed the hair piece on the track. So that's how it's going to be. That's what it's going to look like when you place it on those tracks. But when it comes to the front, how I have marked my lines is the same way I'm going to stitch my tracks. So either it falls forward or it falls sideways. So you can decide to use Afro B. I personally like using Tara for the back because I want it to lie flat. And you can use Afro B at the frontal area because it's fuller. Or you can use straight hair. When you are done, you cut and then style. I'm going to be using the curved method. And either ways, you are still going to come by about the same style, so it shouldn't be a big deal. So you work with whichever one that you're comfortable with, or you can do both on different caps. That's all right. I'm still marking the lines using my tape measure. But as I said earlier, you can choose to stitch in between the tracks you've marked or the lines you've marked. You can choose to stitch in between, as in place hairs in between the white lines that you see marked. As I said earlier, you don't necessarily have to stitch on the white lines that you see. But when you stitch on the white line, it doesn't mean you can't stitch on the part that doesn't have the white lines. You can stitch in between. That's if you want the hair to be fuller. But if you don't want it to be fuller, you just maintain your tracks or your guide, or you work with your guide. You just stitch on the white lines that you see. But if you want it to be fuller, you make sure you stitch in between the lines you've marked. When joining the lines I've marked, I make sure it blends in with the other lines, the line that it's meeting. I just don't make it okay, let me put it this way. If I'm stitching the hair piece onto the, like to meet the other tracks that I've already sewn, I make sure it blends in. I just don't let it sit on top of it, because when you do that, it distorts the how do I call this, the smoothness level of the hair. One side might look bumpy, but as you sew and they meet, it has to blend in. It has to sit properly on the track that you've already sewn. I don't know if I'm making sense. Gradually, I'm closing in on the space on the left side. You can tell that on the right side, the space is reducing. So that's what I'm trying to achieve right now. So you're marking, you shouldn't have a problem if one side is bigger, one space is bigger than the other, especially when it's a side. But when it's a middle, whatever happens on the right happens on the left, as I normally say. So I make sure I close in on the space on the left, because I'm trying to achieve the same spacing that I've left on the left side, on the right side. So that's why you see me marking this way. I really, 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 really want you to get this. That's why I've taken my time to explain and to mark the lines accurately, because usually when I'm personally doing it, I never use a tape measure. I just use my hands and I get my lines accurately. But for the love I have for you, I've taken my time to draw out these things like marks and all that with a tape measure for you to have a better understanding of what we are doing here. And I know by the help of God and practice, I know you are going to get this within the shortest possible time. So if you, at this moment, if you haven't liked this video, kindly do so. If you haven't subscribed, please show me some love And if you've not commented, please do well to leave a comment in the section below and give me some morale. Whatever suggestions that you also have or whatever you want me to do for you, just leave it in the comment section below and I'll do that for you. And don't forget to also share this with your friends who would also like to learn. Sharing is caring. So show your sister some love and like this video, comment, and then share. Thank you. So let's continue with the video. So we're almost done here with the markings. And you see I'm closing in on the left side. So right now you can tell that I'm done marking this thing. This is what I was just trying to achieve. And you can bear me witness. This isn't anything very difficult. It's not rocket science. This is very simple. And I'm sure I'm going to make another video for you to understand more. If you really didn't get it this way, I'll do a different technique in sewing this on a dome cap. Sorry. So this is the finished work of the markings. It doesn't look too perfect, but I think we can work with this. So we are going to be using the Tara 24 pieces for this part. I prefer using the Tara for the back because it lies flat. So this is the type I'm using. And before I sew onto the cap, I make sure I place the cap very flat on the surface of the machine before I start stitching. I make sure it's completely flat without any folds or anything, because if you have folds, certainly there are going to be bumps in the stitches. So you need to be mindful. And when I'm using the Tara 24 pieces, when I open it up, I start using the inner. So this is the very one that I use. I use the weft that is inside. I start with the ones that are inside and I end with the last one at the back. So that's what I start with because that one is way shorter than the ones that come after. So I do with the nip area, I start with single tracks. You can decide to start with single tracks and end with single tracks. You don't need to double the tracks till the end. But if you get to the occipital area, you can decide to double the tracks or triple the tracks there because you want that side to be bulkier. So just make sure you place it flat on the surface of the machine. And then as you sew, the beginning and the end, you need to stitch that place back and forth about 3 to 5 times just to keep that side firm. As you sew, just make sure your fingers are working. Just place your fingers on the net and then make sure it lies flat. And when you get to the end, make sure you stitch back and forth between 3 to 4 or 5 times just to have that particular end in place. We don't want any loose ends because it's very frustrating when you have loose ends. As you sew, just make sure you keep cutting the threads before you continue sewing. At least after every 3 to 4 tracks, you need to cut off the loose threads. If not, you're not going to have a good work done or a neat work done, because as you sew, the threads get in the way of the stitches. So you happen to sew over them, and when you look inside or like in the cup, it doesn't look neatly done. So you need to be cutting after every 3 to 4 tracks at least to have neat work done. And as you sew, just keep your fingers on the net and then open it up. Don't stretch it, but just make sure it lies flat. Just work with your fingers. And as you can see, I'm using my middle finger to lay the track flat onto the net as I sew. And make sure the track that is in my right hand is firmly placed onto the net, because I don't want it to fold. That's why I keep the net flat with my left hand. If you are right-handed, I keep the net down with my left hand, and I control the track or the weft on the cap as I sew. And as I sew, I make sure I push the net through the machine. Even though the machine automatically pushes the net out, it still doesn't give you great stitches. But when you push it out, you have normal stitches. And when sewing with a machine on a dome cap or whichever cap that you are using, the cap is likely to shrink. And the more the stitches, the smaller your cap would be. So that's why you'd have to push it out so that it doesn't shrink. The stitches don't become too tight. Shrinkage. So just keep repeating the same thing over and over again till the end. Just use your guide. When you get to the area where you feel you need to fill in more, you can stitch in between the white lines. So just keep sewing, keep the net flat, use your middle finger to press down the wefts onto the net, and make sure it's as flat as possible as you sew. Wouldn't want a situation whereby you finish sewing it and you wouldn't be able to wear it. So this is the frontal part we spoke about when I was marking the lines on the canvas head. So I'm about to sew on that side or that part. So you can either use Afrobi or you can use straight hair. But I'll begin by using Afrobi because I don't want the front to be too long. So I'm going to use the Afrobi, which is shorter, about 4 inches or so, and I'm going to put about 8 inches after I sew about 3 to 4 tracks of the Afrobi. So I just sew it, and I make sure when I'm sewing that part I stretch the band a bit because depending on the size that you're using, if you made it a size smaller, then you'd have to stretch the band. If not, the band is going to be tight on the frontal area or on your forehead. I'm just using my guide to continue sewing my tracks. So that's what I'm still doing. So I make sure I go back and forth a couple of times before I sew the track onto it. And I'm still making sure that my net is as flat as possible on the machine, and at least I use my fingers to push it through. You don't need to apply a lot of pressure. Just slide it through and it will automatically move. So that shouldn't be a big deal. You don't have to push it so much, just gently. So you just keep following the tracks. When you start, go back and forth a couple of times before you move on. I'm still placing my left hand on the net and I'm stretching it out with my fingers. I'm making use of my fingers. And I'm using my middle finger to place the track firmly down on the net, and I'm still sewing through. So it's still going to be the same method from beginning till end. If you're able to get it this way, I think you should be good to go. So I'm just about ending. So I'm just finishing up with the last tracks. So I followed my guide. I sewed some of the tracks in between. After using the Afrobi, I'm continuing with the long tracks that I showed earlier. It's 8 inches. So I'm placing that above the Afrobi. I sewed the Afrobi about 4 to 5 tracks before using this, simply because I don't want the front to be very long. So I use the Afrobi and then I'm using the 8 inches on top of it so that I'll have a mid-length bang. I don't want it to be too long. That's why I'm doing this. But you can choose to use Afrobi throughout, and you can choose to use 8 or 10 inches throughout. That's for the frontal area. So however you want to achieve your style, you can. And also, if you want the front to be fuller, you need to sew in between the lines or the guide provided, because some don't like flat hair. So if you don't want the hair to be flat at that side, you need to put in more tracks. You can decide to double your tracks at the front so that you have the front looking fuller. If you want it longer, you use longer inches. If you want it shorter, you use shorter inches, or you can choose to cut after doing that. It all depends on you. At a point where you'd have to curve the weft to sew it, you'd have to use your fingers to control it and turn it in that direction, because the machine cannot automatically do that. So you'd have to control it with your fingers and turn it in that direction to be able to sew on your guide. This is the finished work, and we're about to do the cutting. This is what it looks like. I'm using this type of razor comb to cut. When the blade feels blunt, you just take it off and then you remove the hair that is in it, or you can choose to change it, either ways. And the nip area would definitely be flatter than the occipital area, because as I was explaining earlier, you'd want the nip area to be flat, but the occipital area will be a bit up to give it that curve. So that's why I don't pack a lot of hair at the nip area, but I make sure I space it out a bit as compared to the occipital area. So when I'm cutting, I don't cut a lot of, even though I still cut the occipital area because I still want the shape, but I make sure I don't cut so much from that side. I just shape it to blend with the nip area. And you make sure you cut the sides of the wig as well. And when you are done cutting through, then you use the scissors to shape the ends. You can still use your cutter to shape the ends, but it depends on how you'd want your ends to be. Some want very sharp ends. Whatever you'd like to achieve, that's what's most important. So you work with that. So these are the sides that I'm cutting. I make sure that side also goes a bit flatter than the occipital area, because I don't want it to look the same as the back. That side will have to go in a bit for the occipital area to bulge out, else you're not going to see or get the shape that you want. So they cut it really sharp. Some also want it feathered, so they use a razor to also cut it. So that all depends on you. So this is what it's going to look like. I'm going to be showing you in my next video how to tongue and style this pixie cut. You wouldn't be able to see its beauty because we haven't been able to style it, but I just want you to see the end result of what we sewed, and it still fits perfectly on my canvas head. So mind you, just hold the hair and cut through, or thin it with the razor comb. Just hold the ends of the hair and then cut. The essence of this razor, or the part that I'm using, is to thin out the hair. I don't want it to be so sharp, so that's why I hold the hair and then I cut through. So I'm just thinning the hair to have that place look to have it looking less bulky. And as you are cutting too, you already know where you'd want your pattern to. The hassle with having to adjust your mannequin just to get your wig cap done. So so right now I'm spraying water onto the hair to keep it flat. You need to be sure of the pattern you want before you cut, because when you are done cutting, if you happen to take more of the closure onto the left side and you cut more, there's no way you can flip it to the right, because the style is going to change, or you're going to have some of the hairs hanging or sticking out or falling back onto the left side because it's short. So you need to be mindful. As you can see, I parted it to the place I desire, the pattern I desire before trimming. And this is exactly what I've done. So when I'm done with the side, I just come to the front and trim a bit. As I explained that I wanted the front to, the right side to be a bit more than usual. So that's why I added longer inches to it. As I explained earlier, I use the Afro B for the front and I use longer inches in front so that I have a mid-length hair in front because I don't want the front to be too long. That's why I did it that way. That's why I'm spraying the water into it and then I comb it out before I apply my wrap set because I would like the wrap set to touch every part of the hair. So guys, we've come to the end of this tutorial. If you find this tutorial very useful, kindly subscribe, leave a comment in the comment section below and share. I'll be very grateful.